is Nicholas Anthony Johnson.
That's a great name.
And I was Nicholas like my entire life. And then in middle school, I had a science teacher that said, "You look like a Nick. I'm going to start calling you Nick." And I just didn't know any better. And she started calling me Nick. Then other people started calling me Nick. And then since it's been Nick ever since. You became a Nick. And it was 6th grade. And I was, it was a very impressionable age. I was just told I was a better Nick by my science teacher, who I thought was very smart. So everybody started calling me Nick after that. So I had no real say in either one of my names or my nickname. Of course, Nick is like a natural nickname of Nicholas, but that was the progression.
Wow. Well, Nick, welcome to the podcast. That was a great introduction.
Yes.
You are the president of Willis Johnson and Associates.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And we are going to get into your story. We're going to talk about WJA, but more importantly, WJA is a big sponsor of Flipping the Barrel. And so we're super thankful that you, your company, your team helps support Jamie and I to do, what we love, which is talk about oil and gas and energy and executives and, learn from them and their journeys and, give back to the next generation.
I mean, I love that. And I'll be honest, I came across you all because a number of our clients were speakers on your podcast. And that's how I started seeing it for the first time and then started talking to some of our clients about it. And I was like, oh, this is just a great program to, just have an impact, because I think women are having a big impact in the oil and gas industry. And frankly, it used to be an old boys club. Mm-hmm. It's less so anymore, which isn't that dissimilar to finance. It used to be a boys club, and it's not really the same way anymore, but things are changing in terms of you got to have representation so that others can see it and kind of carve the pathway. Mm-hmm. And I think the podcast creates the visibility and the representation and some of those stories.
Yeah, to Massiel's point, when you had reached out and wanted to support us, we were first like, what do they do? This could be interesting. Mm-hmm. And then when we found out that y'all support a lot of the operators within the energy industry, we were like, wow, this is really cool. And you're right, like we had them on the podcast, so it seemed like a great fit. And then more importantly, we were like, well, who's this Nick guy? Like we want to learn about Nick, which is why having you on the podcast as of today has been such a special moment for us, because we want our listeners to know the man behind who's supporting the work that we're doing. So Nick, I'd love to know, and our listeners to understand where you're from, mm-hmm. How you got to where you are today, but more importantly, like what was Nick's life growing up?
Okay. So, I mean, I was born and bred in Houston. I've only lived one other place when I went to Trinity in San Antonio for college, and then I was back to Houston. And so Houston is home for me. I love Houston. I love the culture. I love the food. I do pretty darn well in the hot weather. I actually did my first, a buddy of mine years ago, we started training. He had a bad breakup. We started training for a marathon, and we decided, let's pick a marathon, a beautiful scenic place. So we said, let's do our first marathon in Ventura, California. Well, that marathon happened early September, Labor Day weekend. So I didn't know this because I was only running casually at the time. Well, training for a marathon that's early September means you're running all of your long runs through the heat of the summer. Mm-hmm. So even the Houston hot summer, to some extent, I'm used to and I enjoy, and like this is home for me. Mm-hmm. But I guess your question is kind of background. So I grew up here in Houston. Both of my parents are originally from Laredo. So and both of them actually have Hispanic or Mexican. They each have Hispanic Mexican background as well. So half Hispanic family. Their pediatrician told my parents, don't teach him Spanish as a kid because they didn't want to confuse us. So I only know English. So as my friends joke around, I'm like the least Mexican blooded person they know. But by heritage, I love spicy food. I've got other things. I've got aunts that I call like Theo and Thea, and it's just some of that culture ingrained. Mm-hmm. But grew up here in Houston. Houston's home for me. My family's here. My wife's here. We've got 3 kids here. Our business is here. And I think one of the great things about Houston is kind of the oil and gas industry. And as in our business, that's who we help take care of as employees in the oil and gas industry. For me, started here in Houston, and my father started this business back in 1996. And he left a big insurance company, as he likes to tell, because they were pushing them to sell products people didn't need. Mm-hmm. He wanted to start his own company that he thought he could best help people. Mm-hmm. And so I was 9 at the time. And, just you got to see like some of the entrepreneurship, some of the stress, some of the opportunities, some of those different things. And, then went to college. I double majored in finance and drama. A lot of people are surprised about the drama.
We were very surprised.
Yeah, we were.
We were like, drama? Did not see it coming.
No.
I spent more time in the drama department than I spent anywhere else. And it was a lot of fun. Like
Yeah.
it was my fraternity, it was my social club.
Mhm.
You know, I worked on every single show, more behind the scenes than in front, but I did a little bit of both. And we'd go from like business stat classes to literally coloring. I mean, costume design or scenic
Yeah.
design, but like we'd be coloring in class, and our theater professor is telling us stories about how he uses marijuana for inspiration. But be careful of doing that now because places drug tests. And I'm like, okay, this is
Oh my gosh.
you know, so
That's interesting.
Yeah.
it was an opportunity to use both the left and right side of the brain.
Yes.
Plus, the theater kids threw the best parties. So
Mhm.
whatever your college experience was, if it wasn't a theater kid party, then you didn't really experience the best.
I would have thought finance parties is
Yeah.
where I would want to be at.
Yeah, but the finance kids are broke. They don't have any money.
Not
You know,
yet. Yeah.
They're not
Not
creative.
yet.
Not
So-
yet.
So,
Not
like,
yet.
I get your point from that perspective,
Uh-huh.
but no, the theater kids threw the best parties. So we had a lot of fun in college.
Mhm.
Never saw it really as a career. Just people always ask me, "Oh, you're going to go to Broadway? You're going to try to do this? You're going to go to LA?" Just wasn't like a lifestyle, but it
Mhm.
was the social club. It was the fun thing that I did.
I love that,
But-
like your passion.
Yeah, I mean, I miss it to some extent, but it takes a lot of time to do well.
Mhm.
I've got friends in shows. I've got friends that have been in Broadway. I've got friends that have worked in LA in major movies and different things, and I kind of keep up with stuff. But it's one of those things you can't do everything well, and I wish I had the time to do more things, but it is what it is.
So do you go to Broadway shows? Like, is that a thing? Like, since you're into that, or is that not really?
Pre-kids, like one of my favorite things to do is every year do a long weekend, go to New York,
Mm.
and like I would say, see a matinee show, do wake up, do a run at Central Park, see a matinee show, do a fancy dinner, see a show in the evening, wake up the next morning, do it all again, and like probably see I could do 4 or 5 shows in a long weekend in New York. My wife can't do
Wow.
quite that many shows. It runs, but like I love it.
Yeah.
And you know, I just think the theatrical element, the emotion, the storytelling,
Mhm.
like that's a lot of fun.
That's super cool. I know we were very shocked when we heard. We were like, "Oh, okay, so then why finance?" So tell us what, like, having seen your father and your father
Mhm.
start this company, do you felt like it was something that you were like, "Okay, I'm destined to also, follow in his footsteps,"
Wait, was there
or
pressure there of like the
What-
kids taking over the business at some point?
100%. He has pushed all I've got my parents have 3 kids. I'm the oldest. He's pushed all of us to try to be in the business. And 100% there was pressure. And I'm generally known as the most stubborn of the children in the family.
Mhm.
And so like there was all this pressure, and I was like, like I thought finance was interesting. I loved economics in high school. I loved the stock market. I did the student managed fund in college, and that was great. And I'm like, I don't want to go work for my dad. You know, that was my thought process. I just thought like that would be a mess. I didn't want to do that. I wasn't going to do that.
Mhm.
He pushed my sister. She got into the business school at UT. There's like the honors business program at UT.
Mm.
And she did that for a semester. She's like, nope, not for me. And he was probably the most disappointed I think I've ever seen.
Yeah.
You know, after he's like, she got into the honors business school and you don't want to go keep doing business.
Yeah.
So I think he was pushing all of them. And I think it's a great business.
Mhm.
You got to have an impact on people's lives. It's something that he started. You know, you can make good money. You can have good flexibility. It's a great business. And I think what he describes as the business is it's his 4th child. And to some extent, it's become my 4th child. Like you
Mhm.
spend so much time investing and growing it. Like it is this thing that you're growing. And to see that his other kids were just not interested in being involved in it, that was tough.
Mhm.
And I get
I
that.
can see that.
I
I
get
can
that.
see that. Like, yeah, I could totally see that. Especially like he built this thing.
Mhm.
He's very proud of it. He treats it as a 4th child. Like, why not want your kids to be part of this business instead of like go work for someone else? I could totally get that. But so you did not want to do that. How did you end up actually working for him?
So I graduated in June of 2009.
Mhm.
I had interviewed a number of different places. I was looking for something in finance. My ideal job I wanted to go to is a company called FactSet. They do Bloomberg terminals. You've probably heard of Bloomberg terminals. Okay.
No.
Okay. So Bloomberg terminals is it's a fancy financial analyst terminal that has all kinds of data. But FactSet was a competitor to them. I was trying to get a job there. I got down the interview process. They didn't make a job offer, whether it was the market conditions or they just didn't think I was good enough.
Mhm.
I had some other interviews. I got some job offers, but they're all like insurance sales and other like things that I just thought were mediocre. So It was tough. I didn't have anything I thought was a good opportunity in June of 2009 when I graduated. So I was like, do I take a crappy job
Mm.
that I don't think I'm necessarily going to learn a lot at, and I don't think I'm doing things that are the benefit of other people, or do I go work for my dad? And I went to go work for my dad, and that was hard. I think it kind of beat me up self-confidence. To some extent, I always considered, hey, maybe I go earn something myself, learn something, become successful, and maybe I come back later into the business, but I wanted to earn it. And for the longest time, I felt like this was given to me and I didn't earn it.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of created this like, okay, I've got to work harder. I've got to study harder. I've got to put in more hours. I was very self-conscious, particularly early on in the business.
Mm. How did that affect your relationship with your dad?
Oh, we had a horrendous relationship. Like
I can imagine.
I love how blunt you are.
just absolutely horrendous. And I love my dad. We're very close. In many ways, I trust him more than anyone else, particularly about like the business level stuff today.
Mhm.
But I was probably at 22. I was so immature,
Mhm.
and it's one of those. I was intelligent. I thought I knew things. I didn't know how to navigate the employer-employee, father-son dynamic
Mhm.
because I would be let in to see things and have perspective and share insight with, but at the same time, I didn't have the wisdom or the perspective to understand it. And like the first 5 years, and we've got some employees that are still here with us over that time, will say, you and your dad would go into a conference room and you'd at least be kind and close the door. And then y'all would just be yelling about things. And we would just have these all out, like yelling fights, debates, discussions over what we should do and what I did and what he did and how it should be better and why things aren't working. And we did it we cared about the business and moving forward
Yeah.
way,
Mhm.
but we also did it in a, attacking personalities
Because
way
it's your
that you
dad.
get
Yeah,
into
you're
with
his son.
family.
Like you would never do that to an employee, but you
Yeah.
feel different when it's
It-
your parent.
Yeah, and it was just we didn't know how to navigate that, and personally, I was just incredibly immature at that point in stage. Along the way, we hired a therapist to come in and do counseling on how to navigate the
I
employer.
remember you
love
told
that.
us about that. We
Yeah.
thought that was so
And
interesting.
and honestly, it was really helpful to understand like the perspectives, to understand how the different pieces work, to understand the roles. And it was like, okay, this is the role at work and this is the role outside of that. But it's hard to navigate. Anybody that's involved in a family business, and that somehow made it work, cheers to them, because you have to put in so much work to be able to do it successfully.
Mhm.
So I think that relationship dynamic is hard, and it may just be me and that I was, crazy immature. I'll blame a little bit on him, but let's be honest, it's probably mostly me at that age. But it's hard. It's
Mhm.
really hard, and I think I thought about leaving multiple times, and he thought about firing me multiple times. We kept getting, but somehow it's worked out, and now we're in a very good place.
You know what I think what is interesting when it comes to those dynamics is you think of like, well, I was handed this and now you're having to work with your dad, but sometimes you think about your dad, like that's a risk on him to take his son into the business. And he made that happen. And if you're not doing good, and that looks on his decision to have involved the son. Because I think about it sometimes too, and it's like, oh, we're the ones who were brought in, but it's like they took a huge risk on us and like making even that happen. Because he could have been like, hey, like I don't hire my kids,
Mhm.
So it's interesting to see like he took a big risk to bring you on, and like
I think he did. Now, knowing him, I don't think he even thought about that element of it.
Mhm.
But I think it is a big risk, and it changes the dynamics, and people feel differently. Employees feel differently when the child is brought on, and like, I
yeah, like
mean,
that could ruffle some feathers.
Mhm.
it
That.
and it did, and it did ruffle some feathers, and especially that to some extent, I was probably put in more things earlier on than I had earned my way into. And I think I was smart and I was intelligent, but I wasn't mature and wise at
Mhm.
that stage. So navigating all of that employee dynamics, like, man, I made mistake after mistake after mistake. And it was all of my lessons were learned the hard way. Like just everything from managing employees to, bringing stuff up to just all of that I learned the hard way.
Looking at it now, like what are some things that you think really changed in you after, you can talk about it now saying like I was really immature then, but of course at that time you're not saying like, oh, I'm immature, that's why I'm acting this way. But now like you can reflect back. What do you think are some of the things that you like worked on to change in your leadership style?
I'm gonna be honest, like for the maturity to get there for me, I had to get confident that I was here because I had earned it.
Mm-hmm.
And it
Mhm.
took me a while to get to the point where I was confident that I really felt, you know what, I'm actually adding value. And whether I got in the door or not, because I earned it or not, I'm earning my spot here today. So when I can really pinpoint and say, I did that, I had that impact, I brought in that business, I helped that client, and it took a while to get to that point because I was always my harshest critic and
Mm-hmm.
I was always the toughest. And I think once I got to the point where it's like, okay, irrelevant of how it started, I'm earning my spot today and probably more than earning my spot today, I started to get a little bit of the self confidence back. And then from there, I could start assessing, how am I actually doing
Mhm.
and could take feedback better and then could grow more. But that was the hardest thing for me is I always felt like I was a step behind because I was coming into and I worried too much about what people think, which I guess is what you do in your 20s. And I
Mm-hmm.
was like, everybody thinks I'm here just because I'm Willis's son. And then I'm not. I just kept like playing that over in my
Mhm.
head. And I was always embarrassed and always, to some extent, a little bit ashamed about that I hadn't found my own way. So I had to get over that before I could really start
To
growing more.
progress and grow.
Mhm.
Mhm.
So from when you joined to now, that's like 15-ish years, I think I remember.
So I joined in 2009. Yeah, so we're in 2026, so it's a little bit over that.
Yeah.
Wow. And when did you take over as president? That must have been how did that feel to like really take, like now you're
Make
like
it
full,
basically, yeah, like you
like you
fully.
did a lot of steps in those years. You weren't handed president like after 5 years. Like you still earned a lot of the time and, effort into the company.
I couldn't tell you when that happened because a lot of that transition was slow over time. And to some extent, I had been doing the job for a while and it's, oh, yeah, you've been doing the job for a while. We should update title. It was
Mm.
that kind of thing.
Mhm.
But I'll tell you where some of the changes happened. My father, Willis, left a big insurance company with someone at the time and they started the business. Willis has always been, and he taught me all the values, all the perspectives, but he's always been like, let's invest in growth, let's build something, let's scale something, let's invest in people, let's
Mm.
invest in technology. And 2014 rolled around, and his partner at the time wanted a lifestyle practice. We wanted to spend money. There's different things he wanted to do. He wanted to go out there and he was a different stage. And particularly, I think, because I was in the business and other things, Will and I were both like, let's grow, let's invest, let's build, let's, take some risks. And so there was a difference in terms of wanting a lifestyle practice and wanting to really grow a business. And so there was a messy divorce in 2014 between the two of them. There was a lawsuit involved. I pretty much handled all the legal elements of working with the attorneys and dealing with that because it was very stressful on my father.
Mm.
And as after that went on, which it was so difficult at the time, but it was one of the best things because then it was clear alignment of it's just what do we want to do with the business.
Mhm.
And from 2014 on, we had just incredible growth. We were about 250 million in 2050 after this gentleman, my father's ex-partner, left, and we're just, depending on what day it is in the market, 1.9 billion today.
Wow.
And so we've had incredible growth. We narrowed down our niche. We said, hey, we've been working with oil and gas professionals for a while. We've been doing educational sessions and webinars and seminars, but they're some of the best clients. And they can really value the service. So we said, why are we even marketing to everybody? Why don't we just do this?
Focus.
Yeah.
We narrowed down our market. We started focusing on who we're going to help. We did some reinvestment. We hired stronger people, and that really kind of took off. And as that progressed, this vision that he and I developed together, he kind of just was, he's 69. I'm 39 now. He's 69. He's exactly 30 years older than me. I just started running more and more the day to day and running more and more and running more and more. And he was stepping out of clients and I was stepping into things. And all of a sudden we woke up and he's, traveling and doing things and mostly retired and I'm
Yeah.
running everything. And he's like, oh yeah, I guess we should make a change. So there wasn't like this magic day
Mhm.
that responsibilities occurred, which I think you see a lot of in small businesses and family businesses. There's not this magic day that,
It's just like
there's a
every
title
day
shift
there's
and now
something
these are
happening.
responsibilities.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's this slow progression and you kind of been in
And it's
this
like everybody
role.
knows it too.
And
They're all
everybody
like,
knows
he's
it.
running it. So, oh yeah, okay, finally they changed his title. Okay.
That's exactly what it
Yeah.
has been and what it feels like, to be
Yeah.
honest.
So you talk about the growth. I'm so interested in knowing like what, so when you talk about like your portfolio
Mhm.
and the services you're providing, like what have you seen be like the biggest thing that people are utilizing today to really grow their portfolio? Because for yours to grow, it's all the individual
Mhm.
ones, of course they get added on when you bring on a new customer or new
Mhm.
client or whatever, but essentially they're using you because they want to see that growth
Mhm.
too. What are some key drivers for that? Because that's like it's so impressive to have like the billion
So
word.
I think there's two pieces in that question. Like, what are we doing for our portfolio, and then what are we doing for our clients?
Mhm.
From a portfolio standpoint, I'm going to be honest. The boring basics work for investments over time, and there's a ton of sexy stuff out there, and there's a ton of stuff that gets sold, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But boring, basic, diversified, low cost, we have certain long term tilts that evidence based investing, academic research show work over the long term. You stick with it, you do rebalancing in hard times, you make it tax smart, and how it's pretty, I don't want to say overly simplistic stuff, but it's not hard. What's hard is managing the emotions, is
Mhm.
helping people make the hard choices at the right time. I remember April of last year, Trump came out with his Liberation Day, and the market was down 18% peak to trough over like a week and a half.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
People were panicking. Goldman Sachs was saying there's a recession. JP Morgan saying we're going to have a recession. Everyone is panicking. And our model said, okay, it's time to rebalance. We're underweight equities. We should be rebalancing. And we did it. And we had communicated to clients what we're doing and why and how we're doing it. Look how much the market's run since then.
Mm-hmm.
The S&P was up 17% last year. From the bottom, it was up, I don't know, probably 25%. I'm making up a number. I haven't looked at that one. But I know it was up 17% from January 1 through 31st of 2025. So what's hard to do is the emotional element. And I think what you get from a good advisor, what you get from someone is you get the knowledge, you get the history, you get the perspective to help you do hard things with your money when it's scary.
Mhm.
It's easy when everything's going up to put money in the market and let it run.
Mhm.
It's hard to do the hard thing when it's scary. So, like,
Mhm.
that's a piece of what you get from a good advisor who can bring the knowledge, the consultant, and develops the trust to keep you from doing something dumb. And we were calling clients and talking to people and having those conversations. So, I think that's a piece. The other side to get us there is, really focusing on who we help. So, we have a lot of oil and gas professionals. Right now, there's a lot of layoffs, there's a lot of M&A. And we've got people at, Shell Oil, for example, and they said, "Hey, I was talking to so and so. I'm worried I'm getting a severance package. They said to give you a call, and that you can help me understand it." And they got a severance package, and they're like, "I'm asking HR. I don't understand this. I don't understand this. Like, I'm struggling." We're like, "Oh, we've seen 12 of these the last couple months. We can pull up the severance plan document. We can say, hey, here's how the pension works if you have a certain number of points. And here's where you get to keep your stock. And here's where you don't get to keep your stock. And here are your options. And here are your taxes. And so this is one, how it works. So we're answering questions HR can't answer because we focus so tightly on who we help. We know their benefits inside and out. And then we say, not only here's how it works, here's what we think you should do and why, providing the tax advice, providing the investment advice. We have in-house CPAs. We do tax preparation. We do analysis. So we go very deep. So I always tell people when they come in, they're saying, hey, I was told to talk to you about portfolio management. I'm like, I'm going to be honest. If you want portfolio management, you shouldn't hire us.
Mm.
You can go rebalance your portfolio for 1/3%, at a robo-advisor down the street. People hire us because they want the tax planning, they want the benefit planning, they want the estate planning, they want the integrated portfolio management, but you want all of these pieces working together. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense to pay the cost that we
Mhm.
charge. We're a white glove comprehensive service for a white glove price. So we are not the right fit for everyone, but we know who we help, what we do very well, and we focus on that. The ultra high net worth, like 20 million plus, very different needs. Business owners, very different needs. So there's so many different clients out there that have very different needs. We're building our services towards the clients that we best help, and then training our team on how to do that so well.
Mm. So what would be like your minimum portfolio? Like what's your minimum to like utilize your services? Like do you have you have to have X amount of
So we
savings, X amount of money?
so we have a minimum fee as if we're managing. It's the equivalent to managing 750,000. Generally, we're targeting people that by retirement are going to have between 2 and 20 million. And that's probably the sweet spot. If you're younger, yeah, that can be a little bit lower as long as we're comfortable paying the minimum fee, but if you're 65 years old and it's $1 million, it may not necessarily be the best fit. At the end of the day, what we're really good at doing is bringing all these pieces together when there's lots of complexity and helping make it simple, helping provide the direction. And if you don't have a lot of complexity, may not necessarily be worth paying the fee, and it doesn't, like, our value for the fee doesn't really fit for everyone. So usually people in the 2 to 20 million, we've got 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds, 50-year-olds, 60-year-olds that are starting to work with us, and it's when things are starting to get complex, integrating the stock options and the vested stock and the pension plans and the healthcare and retirement, what I should be electing then, and should I take a severance? Can I start my own thing? How do I do a consulting practice? Once all of those things are getting more complex, then we start to be a really good fit for clients. But if all you need is to rebalance your 401k, there's cheaper places to do it if that's the only need that's out there.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting with that, it's very similar to how people approach like paying for help.
Mhm.
They're like just being cheap, like, why should I pay someone to manage my money, etc. But when you actually see how you can help in so many areas, you're actually like leaving so much money on the table if you don't take care of looking at your taxes, your tax brackets, your RSUs. Like, you need someone that knows what they're doing with your money to help you.
Mhm.
But a lot of people could be cheap and just be like, I'm not going to pay someone. But then you're losing out on so much benefits from someone just looking at the bigger picture and where you're headed and what your goals are.
100%. And I'd say, like, that's why our process is we have an introductory meeting where we have a 3-meeting introductory process. The first meeting, we just sit down, we get to know you, we gather some data, we try to understand where you're at, where you're going. Second meeting, we show you where you're at, we walk through where you're going and answer questions of like, are you on track to be financially independent? How are things doing? And then how do we improve things? And that's where we start to quantify the value. And you have to go through that process because it's an expensive fee and you need to be able to quantify the value to understand what you're going to get. I think the dilemma is, and for this industry, advice industry, if I go to a holiday party or dinner or networking event, people don't know who I am. They say, what do you do? They say, oh, I'm in wealth management. You kind of get that, oh my gosh, they're going to try and sell me something. And there's a good reason for that. The vast majority of people, our industry started out as commissionable sales. I still think the majority of advisors or brokers or people out there are pushing products that pay them money that may or may not be what people need. It's really hard to know. Partially, it's due to horrendous regulation. The broker-dealers are the biggest lobbying group in our industry, but that's a whole separate tangent we can get onto. But people have no idea whether they're sitting down with someone that is a fee-only fiduciary working in their best interest, or they're sitting down with someone that's selling them a product. And the value you get from a fee-only fiduciary working in your best interest, once you have the complexity that you need it, is massive. Is massive. Not everyone needs that high-level complexity. But I think the challenge is they don't know who they're meeting with, and it takes a while for them to figure it out. And I think that's a challenge, that it's a regulatory issue, and it's some other challenges we have in our industry to overcome.
So for those that don't fit maybe in that bracket today and they have money, maybe they are like these guys that work in the field. I mean, they can make so much money on certain hitches. Then we have another downturn, and then all of a sudden all that money is now gone. What's your advice to those people that like have spots during the quarter where maybe they make more money than they do in others? What can they do with their money to make sure it's still working for them? And is there anything that you could, like, your advice for those type of people that, can't get like a financial advisor, but maybe can use like E-Trader or Robinhood or something?
I'd say start with the basics, right? The basics thing that any professional should be doing is you want to have an emergency reserve and a high yield online savings account or something FDIC insured, boring, basic, 3 to 6 months of cash.
What do you suggest for like a safety net? People say like 3 months, 6 months, a year. Like, I know you probably can't say a specific number, or
sure.
can you?
I think you start with 3 to 6 months of expenses. If you're more conservative, or if you're in a highly volatile field where there's a lot of layoffs, maybe 9 to 12 months. But 3 to 6 months is a good starting point in terms of what are your expenses. 3 to 6 months, boring, basic cash. 9 to 12 if you're in a highly volatile field, lots of layoffs coming in and out all the time. So I'd start with that, with cash. Then what are we moving towards, right? If we're trying to build a house, or we're trying to buy a house, or we're trying to do some different things, you might have a different plan. But if you start saving at 25, The rule of thumb is you need to be saving 15% of your income to be able to retire at 65. Now, that can be between you and your company. So if the company is giving you 3%, you need to be saving 12, but you need to be saving roughly 15% of your income if you start at 25 to be able to retire at 65. And if you're doing nothing else, pick a low cost target date fund to get started, right? Or frankly, if you're that young, if you're really in your 20s, stick it all in the S&P just to get started.
Write it up.
Just,
Yeah.
just get started, right? I do think diversification adds value. If we look at last year, the S&P was up 17%. Internationals were up 30. Emerging markets were up closer to 45. So there's diversification makes sense once you get to a certain level of complexity and timelines. But if you're 22 years old, you're 25 years old, I think that's a good starting place. Get your free money. If you're going to get a company stock match and a general employee stock purchase plan or ESPP, get your free money from the company. If you need to put money in your 401k to get the free money from the company, get the free money from the company. Like, make sure you don't miss out on the free money. But one of the differences in our country compared to Europe and a lot of other places is we're responsible for our own retirement. We're responsible. There is Social Security. It may or may not be around when we're getting there, but it is not enough for most people's lifestyle that they want to live. We're responsible for our own retirement. And if you don't start thinking about it earlier, it only gets more costly as time goes on. But 15% of your income, save that, start at 25, if not earlier. Boring basic S&P until you get, $100,000, couple $100,000, and you can think about being, doing something different. And don't touch it. Don't touch it. In any given year, the S&P is positive 3/4 of the time. There is not one 20-year time period where the S&P is negative. You have to go back to the Great Depression to see that. That's since 1950 going forward, not one 20-year time period where the S&P is negative. So if you've got that 20-year time period before retirement, stick in the market, don't touch it. Once things get more complicated, then you can start looking at getting some additional services. But the boring basics just work. And if you try to get too fancy with it, especially if it isn't your expertise, then that's where you get in trouble. Market timing, that's where you get in trouble. Chasing the hot, sexy thing, that's where you get in trouble. Like, that's where the problems are.
You sound so much like my dad. He's a financial advisor. And anytime I see something, I'm like, Dad, I want to put money in this. And he's like, Jamie, keep it where you have it. And then like a month later, that stock or whatever will be like 12 cents. And he's like, see, and I'm like, yeah, that's probably a good idea not to have done it. But it seemed so good at the time.
And I think it's okay to have some play money. Like, if you have 1 to 2% of your net worth that you want to be doing those things, go take 1 to 2% of your net worth and like stick in a Robinhood account and chase something and do, like, if you need to scratch that itch, scratch it. Whereas if it all went to zero, it doesn't matter. But have the core of your net worth invested in what works, what we know over the long term. Because at the end of the day, you're responsible for your money. There's nobody else that's going to come bail you out. We've got a massive debt problem as a government where we're heading towards over 100% debt to GDP. There's no one else that's going to bail you out. And all the voters right now, so actually more importantly, go out and vote. The voters right now are mostly retirees, and they're voting for their own benefits, not the people that are still working here doing those different things. So make sure you take care of yourself. Make sure you take care of future you. You shouldn't be doing it at a massive sacrifice for current lifestyle. And I know things are tough, right? Jobs are, the oil and gas industry, things are tough. It's how do we spend money on housing, and how do we buy a house, and how do I do kids in daycare? Like, it's tough, and it's all sacrifices, and it's all, trade-offs. But if you're not thinking about your long-term retirement, you're going to get to the point where you're 50s or 60s where you're just burnt out and you can't leave. And I see people like that make good income, but they're in their 50s or 60s or 70s and are burnt out, and they can't
leave. Afford their life.
And it gets harder and harder to some extent as life goes on. So be really careful. You don't want to put future you in that situation.
Yeah. When you do these conversations with people and they're just figuring it out and you're kind of showing them their money, etc., how many people would you say that you talk to that like know their money and like are very aware versus like, oh, I didn't know I like wasn't doing that well, I thought I was making really good money? Or like, how would you say people have a pulse on like their financials, or when they come to you they're like, oh, whoa, this is a very different picture than I thought coming in here?
I think there's some people that are very knowledgeable that are building their own spreadsheets that are projecting everything out. I mean, they're like, you guys work with engineers. Engineers are crazy detailed people, and they're researching it, and they're building their own spreadsheets, and they're iterating it, and they're updating. They've been tracking everything down to the penny they spend.
Yeah.
That have these brilliant spreadsheets, and so they're not massively off. They're usually missing the opportunities.
Mhm.
Like oftentimes we'll see, the mega backdoor Roths or the new phase outs with the one big beautiful bill that they don't fully understand or incorporating, or they're missing opportunities, but they have an idea of where they're at. So a lot of those people are coming in and saying, hey, here's where you're at, here's where you're going. But these are the things that actually have a big impact by doing them over time. So we usually see that. But we see a lot of people, and we see this more on kind of the attorney or executive clients. If I'm going to stereotype, there's some women that are super knowledgeable, but there's some women that are just not interested in finance. We see that a little bit more. And they'll come in and they'll just be like, I'm good at my job. I love doing this. I love my family. I've got no interest. Where am I at? What I need to be able to retire at 55. And so we're putting it all together, and they're seeing it the first time. They're like, oh, I can get out earlier than I thought. And we see that both with men and women, slightly more with women, but we get both. The engineering clients have probably overanalyzed it to death, and they're so focused on this, they're missing the bigger picture. But we also see the ones that have no idea where they're at, and that they're actually on track to do something they didn't think they could do. And that's a fun conversation. It's like,
you could leave 10 years earlier.
10 years earlier.
What do you see, like, since you see so many different retirement and ideas of age, of what age they can retire at, what do you see as like the most common amount of money somebody needs to retire?
Oh, that's really hard.
It's
There's no right answer because it's lifestyle. I mean,
Mhm.
think about the people in your friend group or your network, and you can go around and be like, oh, they live an expensive lifestyle, and like they're super thrifty. So that's going to be a very different thing. I'm not a huge fan of rule of thumbs for this because there's more complexity. But if you take like any pensions you get or Social Security or whatnot, so kind of take that and kind of reduce your expenses from that. So if you have, I don't know, 100 grand a year of expenses and Social Security and your pensions, reduce that 30 grand. So you only have $70,000 a year of net expenses. The rule of 4% is not the worst starting place in the world. So as an example, if you have $1 million, that can generate 40 grand a year if you retire at 65. And if you manage it correctly, should last for life expectancy. That is not necessarily going to create multi-generational wealth, but should last for life expectancy. So 4% is a good rule of thumb, assuming you don't blow up your portfolio. And I can't tell you how many people in COVID or how many people in Liberation Day hit the sell button. And if you sell at the bottom, the S&P gives you 8% per year on average since 1950. You're getting 4. Like one bad sell kills your returns for like the next decade, and people don't realize
That's all about around panicking and emotions, though.
It's all about
It's
panicking.
like, oh, I gotta get out.
And you worry more about your portfolio when you're not working generating income anymore, because that's it. And you're like, oh, if I lose it, I'm screwed. But then, so you react, and now you're actually worse off. And that's where I see people that weren't emotional about their portfolio in retirement or getting close to retirement become more emotional about their portfolio.
So I think around the 4% rule, and I learned it maybe like 2 years ago, and I was like, oh my God, why have I never heard of this before? And I would say like most people listen to this podcast, even though they're smart engineers, and they have no idea what the 4% rule is because it's not taught that often. And even when it was explained to me and like reviewed, I was like, there's no way. Like, you mean after X amount of years, I could just live off and never work again? Like, that doesn't wrap around my head. Like, I'm like, no, you have to work for the rest of your life. Like, that's what you're taught. Can you break down the 4% rule for people? Because I think they could probably go in and do their 4% rule and be like, oh, I could actually stop working at X. But it all depends on like what your lifestyle looks like. Like, how much are you spending per month and how much do you need to live?
So the idea behind a 4% rule, I think this was developed in like the 60s or 70s. A financial advisor, they ran all these different historical returns. And they said, even if you have the absolute worst market, how much can you safely withdraw from your portfolio plus inflation and not run out of money? And what they solved for is it ended up being right around 4%. Now, it's assuming you have a portfolio that is 50% equities. So let's call it the S&P, 50% bonds, and it's rebalanced annually. So if you're 100% equities, it can blow up on you. 100% bonds isn't getting enough growth. So those are kind of the assumptions built in to the thesis of the 4%. And the idea is if you have $1 million, that $1 million can generate $40,000 a year
and never run out.
And plus inflation and not run out based on all the historical returns, good markets and bad markets. So if you run like the next 30, 35 years, all the historical 30, 35 years, and you stick with a portfolio, means you don't panic sell, means you don't react, means you don't chase things and get more aggressive at a bad time. You don't do all the emotional things. You just hands off, let it run, take your 4% out per year. It can last for that 30, 35 years that you tend to see in retirement without running out of money. It does not last in the worst case environments for 60 years. So it doesn't create that generational wealth. And the worst sequence of return risks, which is, hey, you retire, you have a recession. Like the worst thing for running out of your portfolio dying is you retire, you're starting to take money out of it, and that's when you have a recession. Because it dips, you're pulling money out of it here,
and it's not
and when it
growing
recovers,
anymore.
it has less to recover. So the sequence of return is the biggest risk. Having a recession immediately after you retire, or as you're taking money out of the portfolio, is the biggest risk. And so it's a good rule of thumb. It's not perfect, but it's a good rule of thumb if you're not going to be working with someone who's an expert that's modeling, laying it out, and helping to analyze all these different things. But so if you've got, $5 million portfolio, that's 200 grand a year. Can you live on 200 grand a year? And so like that's the rule of thumb behind it, or 200 grand a year plus Social Security and pension income, or whatever it is.
I mean, that's just even saying that you're taking out $200,000 a year. You might not,
You might not need it, but the rule of 4% gives you a rough estimate. It's a starting
of like how much you
point.
can live for without ever having to work again, and just that
Yes.
freedom thought is cool. I think when you can analyze and be like, oh, okay, by this age or this
and money can
network,
make me money where I'm not having to work to have that 40 grand or that 100 grand. It's just your money doing it for you.
I have a question on just the die with zero concept. A lot of times I think when people go look at their portfolios and like, past 65, it shows that in general people like will pass away with like a ton of money left over. Because like we're all saving for this day. We're all saving for retirement, whatever. And then like you actually realize a lot of the savings kind of like somebody else uses them. Like they'll be your kids or somebody else. How do you see like that concept, and maybe people who are coming in with that kind of wealth, it's all about like the emotion and how they feel around money, the psychology on money. Like what is something that you can, maybe some advice on like, I don't know how to say the question, but I also hear so many people who are like, okay, when I get to this net worth, like I'll be happy. And then they go to the next net worth and like it's like this chase that never ends. Like how do you suggest people look at their financials and not get so caught up on like, when this happens, I'll be happy, because then they're going to go for that next goalpost.
This is really hard for people. And you look at a lot of people that start in their 20s and 30s, they've paid their way through school. They're, they're got their own professional career. They're building, they're saving, they're living within their means. They're doing all that. All of a sudden, these same people wake up and they're 60 years old and they have more money than they know what to do with. And they never learned how to spend. That is a very common thing. They've never learned how to spend, and they were maybe even sacrificing things in their 40s or 50s
that they didn't even need to.
That they didn't need to. And I do think that's one of the big values of working with a good advisor is they tell you can go start spending money. But I mean, here's another way to think about it. Like maybe you get 80 summers, right? Or, maybe you get 80 summers. We keep telling ourselves next year I'll do this, or then I'll do that, or then I'll reconnect with that friendship or spend the time with my kid. Maybe you get 80 summers. That's not a lot. So like,
and 80 summers is if you're like super lucky,
Yeah,
with good health.
And that's maybe.
With
That's
good health.
Maybe.
Right? I had a client, and this client, his wife, he was in his early 60s. His wife is saying, "You need to retire. You're too stressed. You need to retire." For years, he finally retired. The week after, he had a heart attack on a golf course. And, we've been working with his wife for years after that. And I think one of her big regrets is I wish I could have convinced him, because we kept having all these dreams and all these things.
That he was fine.
And all he would do is work. So I think, when you get money involved, time is more valuable than money. And I think you got to find the right balance. You don't want to leave future you in a bad shape where you can't retire, you can't live the life you want, but you want to be enjoying your life along the way. And doing those things that make an impact, especially our clients, once they get to retirement, we have these conversations with some of them, not all of them, that it's, hey, you should fly first class because otherwise your kids are. Hey, you should do things that make memories. One of my favorite clients, their big goal was, we're going to take all of our kids and all of our grandkids, and this is something like 20 plus people, to Disney World for a week. We're going to take them all to Disney World, and we're going to do it top of the line. We're going to do, and like it was the big memory thing. And for them, it was, they didn't feel, it was kind of obvious, but they didn't feel that they had the money to do some of these things until we walked them through the impact. And yeah, the amount of money they spent to do all that, they could not do every single year of retirement, but they could do one. And then every 3 or 4 years doing something. So the thing about money is just a tool to help accomplish things. And I think what a lot of people need to think about, and we try to work with clients on, is understanding your goals and objectives and what you're trying to do, and actually go spend your money. For some people, they like to watch it grow. For some people, they like the idea of leaving it more to their kids, or like to leaving big amounts to charities. But most people would rather have better memories with their kids, or better memories with their grandchildren, or do those once in a life experiences with their spouse when they're young and healthy enough to do that. I often have this conversation, even with 60-year-olds. I'm saying, you're young and healthy enough to do the trip now. 10 years, 15 years, who knows? You're in your 60s. 10 or 15 years, you should do the scuba diving trip. You should do the big hike in New Zealand. You should do because right now you're young and healthy enough. And they're like, no one tells me I'm young and healthy. But as you think about it, the next 15 years, they might not be. Things
It's
could
just
dramatically.
downhill from there. I'm kidding.
And there's people that do a better job taking care of themselves
Yeah,
than
but
others, but there's just genetics.
genetics. Yeah.
Wow, Nick,
I love this podcast.
I love this
We can
podcast.
talk about
It's
this.
so good. But I know we're coming up on our time. So to leave our listeners, like, what's one piece of advice that you have gotten, or maybe something that you might teach your kids? Because you have 3 kids, by the way, which we didn't get into that, but that's pretty awesome as well. And your wife works too, so y'all are very successful, both dual working parents. What is something that you would leave our listeners with?
I mean, one of the things I think a lot about in children is, how do we raise our children? My wife is a pediatrician. I'm running a wealth management firm, and we didn't start this way. In our 20s, we're tough and we're scraping by. And I remember right after I bought the house, I wouldn't let people turn on the AC. So I remember lots of things going, but now we're in a situation that we're very blessed. And so we think about, how do we not raise our children to be spoiled? And I think one of the things that I'm focusing on a lot is creating scarcity for our kids, and just not letting them have everything, doing allowances and letting them have to, running out of money of things that they want to pick. So I think being left wanting for things that, yeah, my wife and I could easily afford the dessert or the toy or the this or whatnot at the stage of life. It wouldn't make a big difference to us. But creating scarcity for our children when we have the means to give them a lot of, really at this age, between 2 to 7, anything they're asking for, is something we're focusing on a lot. And it's hard because the kids are sad and they complain and they this, but I think scarcity teaches us something, and teaches us about trade-offs, and teaches us that there isn't this magic money that's going to be around to like always solve everything. And I think hard work and scarcity, those are 2 of the values I really want to impart on my children, because there's no magic anybody that's going to solve all of things for you. And I see next generation kids blow it. I see people inherit and just be so wasteful that I know their parents, they'd be rolling in their graves. And I worry about, raising children that are going to be smart, that are going to work hard, they're going to be financially independent, and they should be successful if we gave them nothing. I want to raise kids like that. So I'm thinking about, how do we focus on doing that?
I love that.
I love that.
I think we're very in line with that. To continue that on with our kids, because I've seen the trust fund babies, and you're like, oh gosh, like but again, it's really hard when, like, we've had this conversation too, where it's like, we want to do all these things and instill this in our daughter, but it's like, she's growing up in a house that like we would have never imagined growing up in. She's going on trips already that we would have, but it's the lifestyle that we have today. And so, but you also, it's all about like talking to them about it, and how that value starts at home. And like, I definitely at the grocery store, I'm like, you don't have money, I don't have money. I always say that. I'm like, you gotta earn it, but at the same time, she's growing up around a life that's, you can't take that, like, they're growing up in a different household. They live in a beautiful house in Houston,
we have that conversation all the time. I was like, no, this isn't your money. This is mommy and dad's money. We've worked hard. We want to do this. This is what we want to do. If that's something you want, you need to save up on your allowance, or you need to like do some chores, or you need, like, if there's things you want, you got to figure it out. If mommy and daddy want to go see a movie and take y'all to a movie, we're spending our money on something we want to do, not something on you want to do. If there's something you want to do, you got to figure out how you're going to
I
get there.
love it.
Like that's a conversation we're having a lot with our 7-year-old and just starting to talk about with our 5-year-old. But it's like, this is our money. We've earned it. It's ours.
Yeah.
It's not family money. It's not yours. It's not,
I like
we're here to
that.
bail you out of
I like
everything. This
that.
is ours.
I like it. That's really great advice,
Yeah.
I think, for
Yeah,
everybody.
that's really good, Nick. I'm very happy with a wonderful podcast. Great advice for our listeners. Couldn't be more happy to have you here, Nick, and have your support on the podcast. So thank you once again, and thank you for spending time with us. I know people that are listening to this are gonna walk away with so much, from the 4% rule to now just closing out on kids. Like, it's got me thinking. So I really appreciate it. And for those listening, you can find us on flippingthebarrel.com, Flipping the Barrel on Instagram, on LinkedIn. And Nick, where can they find you and your firm?
WJohnsonAssociates.com is probably the easiest place. And if you're interested, you can get articles, you can connect with an advisor, we can schedule a meeting, or follow me on LinkedIn.
I love your LinkedIn.
Yeah, get great advice on his
follow
LinkedIn.
I'm regularly
Nick's LinkedIn.
posting market-related commentary, graphs, charts, information. I do a market-related webinar once a quarter. So if you really like market-related charts, information, in a simple, easy-to-understand way, what's actually going on, you read the newspaper and they're like, crazy. But I kind of break down what's actually happening. I do a webinar once a quarter. It's about to come up on just market-related items. So really love diving into that as well.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, everybody. And we'll catch you on the next podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.